the fluorescent lights of the courtroom hum, a dull counterpoint to the frantic thumping in my chest. Edward Thompson, a man who'd always prided himself on his quiet dignity, sat ramrod straight, my knuckles white against the polished wood of the table. My lawyer, Ms. Jensen, a brisk woman with eyes as sharp as a hawk's, squeezed my hand. "Steady, Mr. Thompson," she murmured. Just a few more minutes, easy for her to say. She wasn't the one about to face the son who'd publicly humiliated him, the son who'd spun a web of lies so thick and intricate. It had almost suffocated me. My gaze drifted across the room to where my son, David, and his wife, Melissa, sat. They were a picture of affluent composure. David, in his tailored suit, looked every bit the successful entrepreneur he claimed to be. Melissa, draped in expensive jewelry, smiled serenely, a small, smug curve to her lips. Hidden poverty meets glittering wealth in a tale of revenge. I thought bitterly. "All rise," the bailiff called. Judge Mallory, a stern-faced woman with a no-nonsense air, entered the courtroom. The rustling of papers and the hushed whispers died down. My stomach clenched. This was it, the culmination of months of planning, a swallowing my pride, a painstakingly gathering the evidence I needed to expose the truth. The lawsuit I'd filed against my own son wasn't about money, not really. It was about reclaiming my dignity, about exposing the lie that had cast a shadow over my life. It was about the $8,000 a month David claimed he was giving me, a lie he'd brazenly proclaimed on a local television interview. An interview meant to bolster his image as a devoted son and philanthropist. $8,000 a month. "That's what I give my father so he can live in comfort," he'd said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. The camera had panned to him, his smile wide and confident. I remembered watching it, the blood draining from my face, the remote slipping from my numb fingers. The shame had been a physical blow. "Mr. Thompson," Judge Mallory's voice cut through my memories. "Are you ready to proceed?" "Yes, Your Honor," I managed, my voice surprisingly steady. Ms. Jensen rose. "Your Honor, we are here today because my client, Mr. Edward Thompson, has been the victim of a cruel and calculated deception. His son, David Thompson, has publicly and repeatedly claimed to be providing him with substantial financial support. This claim, Your Honor, is a blatant fabrication." David's lawyer, a slick, expensively dressed man named Mr. Caldwell, jumped to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor, this is pure speculation. Mr. Thompson has no proof to back up these accusations." Ms. Jensen smiled, a thin, predatory smile that sent a shiver of anticipation down my spine. "Oh, but we do, Mr. Caldwell. We have quite a bit of proof," the courtroom buzzed. I could feel David's gaze burning into me. Melissa's smile had faltered, replaced by a look of apprehension. "Good. Let them squirm. Let them feel the weight of their deceit bearing down on them. Mr. Thompson," Ms. Jensen turned to me, "can you tell the court how you felt when you first heard your son's claims about supporting you financially?" I took a deep breath, the courtroom air heavy with expectation. "I was shocked, Your Honor, humiliated. I'd worked hard my entire life. I'd never asked anyone for a handout, and certainly not from my own son." My voice trembled slightly. The memory of that initial shame, of the whispers and stares that had followed David's public declaration, still stung. I could feel my hands clenching again, the knuckles white against the wood. "Did you confront your son about this?" Ms. Jensen prompted. I did, I reply. I called him, asked him why he'd lie. He had denied it at first, said it was a misunderstanding. Then he had changed his story, said it was for my own good, that it was to protect my pride. Can you imagine, Your Honor, my own son claiming to protect my pride by publicly humiliating me? A murmur rippled through the courtroom. I glanced at David. He was staring straight ahead, his jaw clenched, his face pale. Melissa was whispering something in his ear, her hand resting on his arm in a gesture that looked more possessive than comforting. Mr. Thompson, Ms. Jensen continued, did you ever receive any financial assistance from your son? Never, I stated firmly. Not a single penny. The lie hung in the air, heavy and suffocating, a testament to the depths of my son's deception. I closed my eyes for a moment, picturing the meager meals I'd been forced to eat, the threadbare clothes I'd worn, the constant worrying about making ends meet. A son's public lie shatters a father's pride, a voice whispered in my mind. It was more than pride. It was my very sense of self that had been shattered. Mr. Thompson, Ms. Jensen's voice was sharp, bringing me back to the present. Can you describe your current financial situation for the court? I hesitated, talking about my poverty, about the sacrifices I'd made to maintain a semblance of dignity, was almost as humiliating as David's lie itself. But I knew I had to do it. This was my chance to reclaim my truth, to live on a fixed income, Your Honor, Social Security. It barely covers my basic expenses. The words fell like stones in my mouth. I've had Toto make sacrifices. I've had to sell some of my belongings, things that meant a great deal to me. My voice cracked. I could feel the tears pricking at the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them back. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me break down. Miss Jensen placed a comforting hand on my arm. I know this is difficult, Mr. Thompson, but your courage in speaking out is admirable. She turned to the judge. Your Honor, we have bank statements, witness testimonies, and a mountain of evidence that proves Mr. Thompson's claims. His son, David Thompson, has not only lied to the public, but he has also abandoned his father to a life of hardship and indignity. Mr. Caldwell sprang to his feet again, his face flushed. Objection, Your Honor. This is a blatant attempt to smear my client's reputation. Judge Mallory banged her gavel. Order. She looked at Mr. Caldwell, her expression stern. Mr. Caldwell, your objections are becoming tiresome. Let Mr. Thompson tell his story. The judge's words were like a balm to my wounded spirit. Finally, I was being heard. Finally, the truth was starting to surface. I looked at David and Melissa. Their faces were masks of anger and fear. The smugness had vanished, replaced by a dawning realization that their carefully constructed facade was beginning to crumble. And Edward Thompson, the quiet, dignified old man they thought they could walk all over, was the one tearing it down, brick by painstaking brick. The courtroom felt charged, the air thick with anticipation. This was only the beginning. The squeak of the rusty swing set echoed in my ears, a metallic counterpoint to the chirping crickets. Dusk was settling over the small backyard, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and fading gold. I sat on the porch steps, the worn wood familiar beneath my calloused hands. Eleanor had brought out a glass of iced tea, condensation clinging to the sides like tiny teardrops. Penny for your thoughts, Edward, she asked, her voice gentle. I took a slow sip, the sweetness of fleeting comfort. Just thinking about David, I admitted, the name a heavy stone in my mouth. And that damned Christmas banquet, Eleanor sighed, a sound laden with years of weary understanding. He shouldn't have said those things, Edward. It wasn't right. $8,000 a month. I muttered, the lie a bitter taste on my tongue. He stood there in front of all those people, bragging about how he takes care of his poor old father. A son's public lie shatters a father's pride, Eleanor. He knows it. Melissa knows it. The image of that night, sharp and vivid, played out behind my eyelids. The opulent ballroom, glittering with chandeliers and filled with the murmur of affluent guests. David, resplendent in his tailored suit, raising his glass in a toast. My father, Edward, he's getting on in years, needs a little help these days. But I'm happy to say I'm taking good care of him. $8,000 a month. It's the least I can do. The applause that followed was a stinging slap. I remember the faces in the crowd, a mix of admiration and pity. Pity for the old man, so dependent on his successful son. Admiration for David, the dutiful, generous provider, and me. I sat there, a ghost at my own life's celebration, a smile plastered on my face, my stomach churning with a mixture of shame and rage. Eleanor's hand, warm and comforting, covered mine. He's a fool, Edward, a blind, arrogant fool. Let it go, I scoffed, the words tasting like ash. How can I let it go, Eleanor? He's painted me as a charity case, a burden. And for what? To inflate his own ego, to impress those vultures. They aren't worth your anger, Edward, she said softly. They don't know the real you. But that's the thing, Eleanor, I said, my voice rising with a sudden surge of frustration. He doesn't know the real me either. He hasn't known me for years. My mind drifted back, further back, to a time before the lies, before the betrayal. A time when David was still a boy with bright eyes and a gap-toothed grin. We were at the park, the same park where I now sat, the swing set freshly painted, its chains gleaming in the sun. David wanted a new baseball glove, a fancy leather one he'd seen in the sporting goods store. It was expensive, more than we could comfortably afford. But I wanted to give him the world. Dad, please, he'd begged, his eyes wide with pleading. All the other kids have won. I looked at Eleanor, a silent conversation passing between us. We both knew it was a stretch, but seeing the longing in David's eyes, we couldn't resist. We bought him the glove. A few days later, David's older brother, Michael, came home from school, dejected. His own glove, worn and tattered, had finally given out. He needed a new one. But this time the answer was different. We just bought David a new glove, I'd told him, my voice laced with guilt. We can't afford another one right now, son. You'll have to make do. Michael's face fell, his disappointment palpable. He didn't argue, didn't complain. He just nodded, a quiet acceptance that settled over him like a shroud. He took David's old glove, the one he'd discarded without a second thought, and tried to repair it with needle and thread. I remember watching him, my heart heavy with a sense of unfairness. I tried to explain, to reason with him, to tell him that we loved them both equally, but the look in his eyes, that quiet resignation, told a different story, a story of favoritism, of unspoken resentment, of a wound that would fester beneath the surface. The memory faded, replaced by the harsh reality of the present. The rusty swing set, the chipped paint on the porch railing, the weight of poverty pressing down on me. David basking in his fabricated generosity, oblivious to the damage he'd inflicted. He doesn't know what it's like, I said, my voice low and thick with emotion. He doesn't know what it's like to go without, to scrimp and save, to make sacrifices. He's never had to. Eleanor squeezed my hand tighter. He's made his choices, Edward. Let him live with them. But I can't just let him get away with this, I said, a new resolve hardening my voice. He needs to understand the consequences of his actions. He needs to know what it feels like to be humiliated, to be stripped bare, to have your pride trampled upon. I looked out at the darkening sky, the first stars beginning to appear. A plan, a seed of an idea, began to take root in my mind. It was a long shot, a risky gamble, but the thought of David finally understanding the pain he'd caused, the thought of exposing his lies and restoring my own dignity, fueled a flicker of hope in the deepening twilight. He thinks he knows me, I whispered, a grim smile spreading across my face. He has no idea. Eleanor looked at me, a mixture of concern and curiosity in her eyes. What are you thinking, Edward? I took another sip of my iced tea, the sweetness now tinged with a different flavor, the flavor of anticipation. I'm thinking, I said, my voice steady and determined, that it's time David learned a lesson. Flashback underscore to the rain hammered against the corrugated iron roof of my workshop, a relentless drumming that mirrored the anxiety churning in my gut. I'd retreated there after Eleanor's funeral, the small space crammed with half-finished projects, and the lingering scent of sawdust and varnish. It was my sanctuary, the one place where I could still feel some semblance of control amidst the chaos that had engulfed my life. The grief was a heavy cloak, suffocating me, but even sharper was the betrayal, the raw, festering wound that Melissa and my son, David, had carved into my heart. A son's public lie shatters a father's pride. That lie, that brazen fabrication about David's generous monthly allowance, echoed in my ears, each repetition a fresh slap to my dignity. I ran a calloused thumb over a piece of maple, its smooth surface a small comfort. The wood was meant for a rocking horse, a gift for a grandchild I might never see. I'd poured hours into it, carving the delicate features, sanding the wood to a satiny finish. It was a labor of love, a tangible expression of the joy that had once filled my life. Now it felt like a mockery, a symbol of all I had lost. The workshop door creaked open, letting in a gust of wind and rain, followed by Melissa. She stood silhouetted against a gray light, her face unreadable. Edward, she began, her voice as smooth and cold as polished marble. We need to talk. My jaw tightened. I didn't reply, just continued running my hand over the unfinished rocking horse. I knew what this was about. David is worried, she continued, stepping further into the workshop, the hem of her expensive coat brushing against the dusty floor. Worried about what you might say. I finally looked up, my gaze meeting hers. And what exactly do you think I'll say, Melissa? She folded her arms, her expression hardening. David has built a successful life, a respectable life. He can't afford to have that jeopardized by misunderstandings. I repeated the word, the bitterness coating my tongue. He lie, Melissa. He stood up in front of those people and painted a picture of a doting son generously supporting his aging father, and you stood there beside him, nodding along, letting everyone believe it. Melissa sighed, the theatrical display of exasperation. Edward, you have to understand, Appearances are important. David's reputation is everything. And what about my reputation? I asked, my voice rising. What about the years I spent building a life, a family? What about the respect I earned? She waved a dismissive hand. No one cares about that anymore, Edward. You're old, you're irrelevant. The only thing that matters now is David's future. Her words hit me like a physical blow. Irrelevant. The word hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I felt a sudden surge of anger, a hot, burning rage that threatened to consume me. But I tamped it down, forcing myself to remain calm. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. So let me get this straight, I said, my voice steady. You want me to continue this charade, to pretend that your husband is some kind of saint while I struggle to make ends meet? David is offering you a solution, she said, her tone softening slightly. He's willing to continue the assistance as long as you maintain discretion. Assistance, I scoffed. He hasn't given me a dime, not a single penny of this supposed $8,000 a month. Melissa's eyes narrowed. Don't push it, Edward. Be grateful for what's being offered. I stood up, pushing the rocking horse aside. I felt a sudden surge of defiance, a refusal to be bullied and manipulated any longer. I won't be silenced, Melissa. I won't be complicit in this lie. She took a step back, her composure finally cracking. You dare threaten us, old man? I'm not threatening you, I said, my voice low and steady. I'm simply stating a fact. I won't be silenced. The rain continued to batter the roof, the sound a constant reminder of the bleakness that had settled over my life. I looked at Melissa, her face contorted in a mixture of anger and fear. She knew I meant it. She knew that I was no longer the docile old man she thought she could control. You'll regret this, she hissed before turning and storming out of the workshop, leaving me alone with the ghost of my past and the uncertain future that lay ahead. The silence that followed her departure was deafening. I stood there for a long time, the rain drumming against the roof, the scent of sawdust and varnish filling my nostrils. I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, grief, and a flicker of something else, something that felt almost like hope. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of purpose. I wouldn't let them win. I wouldn't let them erase me. I would fight back. I ran my hand over the unfinished rocking horse, the smooth wood a comfort against my rough skin. I thought of Eleanor, of the life we had built together, the life that had been stolen from me. I closed my eyes, a single tear tracing a path down my weathered cheek. Then, taking a deep breath, I picked up my tools and went back to work. The rocking horse wouldn't finish itself, and neither would I. I had a plan, a quiet, carefully constructed plan, and I wouldn't rest until I had seen it through to the end. I would reclaim my dignity, my pride, and my legacy. They had underestimated me. They had mistaken my quiet dignity for weakness. They would learn soon enough that I was not a man to be trifled with. The game had changed, and they hadn't even realized it yet. The stale air of the pawn shop clung to me like a shroud. It smelled of dust and regret, a fitting aroma for the task at hand. I clutched the worn leather pouch tighter, its contents a small fortune to me, a pittance to the likes of Melissa and my son David. How much can I get for these? I asked the man behind the counter, my voice barely above a whisper. He was a burly fellow with a walrus mustache and eyes that seemed to assess everything, missing nothing. He took the pouch, his thick fingers untying the drawstring. Inside lay Eleanor's jewelry, pieces she'd cherished, gifts I'd given her over a lifetime of love and struggle. A small diamond pendant, a ruby ring, a delicate gold bracelet. Each sparkled faintly under the harsh fluorescent light, whispering tales of birthdays, anniversaries, quiet moments of joy amidst the hardship. "Not much," he grunted, his gaze flitting from the jewelry to my face, calculating. "Costume jewelry mostly. The ring might fetch something," but he trailed off, shrugging his massive shoulders. "I need enough for a bus ticket to Chicago," I said, my voice firm despite the tremor in my hands. Chicago. The thought of the city, its sprawling expanse, filled me with a strange mixture of fear and anticipation. He named a price, an insultingly low figure, that I swallowed my pride and accepted. This was just the beginning, a small sacrifice for a greater cause. A father's quiet dignity confronts a son's ruthless ambition. I repeated the phrase in my mind, a mantra to steel my resolve. Hidden poverty meets glittering wealth in a tale of revenge. Yes, that's precisely where this was headed. The bus ride was long and uncomfortable. The endless highway unfolding before us mirrored the long road I'd traveled in my life, a road paved with hard work and dashed hopes. I thought about Eleanor, gone these past 5 years, and how much she would have hated seeing me like this, reduced to pawning her treasures, forced to flee my own home like a common criminal. But I knew, deep down, that she would understand. She'd always been my rock, the one person who truly saw me, understood the quiet strength beneath the surface. Chicago. The city loomed before me, a concrete jungle teeming with life and anonymity. I found a cheap motel in a rundown neighborhood, the kind of place where secrets thrived and judgments were suspended. The room was small, barely more than a cot and a cracked sink, but it was a sanctuary, a temporary reprieve from the storm brewing inside me. For days I wandered the city streets, lost in thought, piecing together my plan. Each step, each breath, fueled by the burning embers of humiliation and betrayal. David's lie, broadcast to the world, had stripped me bare, exposed me as a charity case, a burden, and Melissa, with her venomous smile and carefully crafted words, had fanned the flames, turning my own son against me. I visited libraries, poring over old newspapers, microfilm archives, searching for any scrap of information that could help me. I spent hours in coffee shops, observing people, studying their faces, their interactions, learning to blend in, to become invisible. I was a ghost, haunting the edges of a world I no longer recognized. One evening, huddled in my cramped motel room, I came across a name in an online forum, a name that sent a jolt of electricity through me, Agnes Blackwood. She'd been a junior partner at my old firm decades ago, before I was forced into early retirement. A sharp woman with a keen eye for detail and a reputation for discretion. If anyone could help me, it was her. The next morning, I found her office, a small, unassuming suite tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. She greeted me warmly, her eyes sparkling with recognition. "Edward Thompson." "It's been ages," she said, her voice laced with genuine surprise. "What brings you to Chicago?" I explained my situation, laying bare the years of deception, the public humiliation, the desperate need for justice. She listened patiently, her expression shifting from surprise to concern, then to a flicker of steely resolve. "I can't believe David would do this to you," she said, shaking her head. He always seemed like such a good boy. Appearances can be deceiving, Agnes, I reply, my voice laced with bitterness. So what can I do to help? She asked, her eyes fixed on mine. I laid out my plan, a carefully constructed web of countermaneuvers designed to expose David and Melissa's lies and restore my tarnished reputation. It was a risky gambit, but I had nothing left to lose. Agnes listened intently, occasionally interjecting with questions or suggestions. When I was finished, she sat back in her chair, her face etched with thought. "This is audacious, Edward," she said finally, "but I like it." A slow smile spread across her face, a smile that mirrored my own growing sense of anticipation. "I have a few ideas that might make it even more effective." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Agnes, with her network of contacts and her sharp legal mind, proved to be an invaluable ally. She uncovered documents, tracked down witnesses, and pieced together a compelling narrative that contradicted David's carefully constructed lie. I learned to navigate the city's hidden corridors of power, meeting with private investigators, forensic accountants, and legal experts. I felt a renewed sense of purpose, a surge of energy I hadn't felt in years. The humiliation, the betrayal, the quiet desperation, they were still there, simmering beneath the surface, but now they were channeled, focused, transformed into a weapon. Then came the day of the deposition, the moment I'd been waiting for, the first real opportunity to confront David and Melissa. The courtroom was cold and impersonal, the air thick with anticipation. David sat across from me, his face pale and strained, Melissa beside him, her usual composure replaced by a nervous fidgeting. Their lawyer, a slick, expensive-looking man, began his questioning, his voice dripping with condescension. He tried to paint me as a senile old man, clinging to delusional fantasies of wealth and influence. He brought up my financial struggles, my dependence on government assistance, twisting the facts to fit his narrative. He even dared to question my love for my own son, suggesting that my lawsuit was nothing more than a spiteful attempt to extort money from a dutiful child. With each jab, each insinuation, I felt the anger rise within me, a burning tide threatening to overwhelm me. But I held back, maintaining a facade of calm detachment. Letting their lawyer weave his web of lies, I knew my time would come. Then, just as he reached the crescendo of his interrogation, just as he was about to deliver the final, devastating blow, I played my card. "I believe I have something that will shed some light on this matter," I said, my voice quiet but firm. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a thick manila envelope. Inside lay the fruits of my labor, the evidence Agnes and I had painstakingly gathered, the key to unlocking the truth. David's face went white, his eyes wide with panic. Melissa's carefully crafted mask of composure cracked, revealing a flicker of fear. "What is that?" the lawyer sputtered, his voice laced with sudden uncertainty. "A little something I've been saving for a special occasion," I reply, a slow smile spreading across my face, the smile of a man who has finally found his revenge. I handed the envelope to the court clerk, my heart pounding with anticipation. The game was far from over, but the tide had turned. I had them right where I wanted them. The courtroom air, thick with anticipation, pressed down on me. I smoothed my worn suit jacket, a garment that had seen better days, much like myself. My hands, gnarled with age, trembled slightly as I adjusted my tie. "Ready, Edward, my lawyer." Ms. Ramirez, a woman whose sharp intelligence shone brighter than her expensive shoes, placed a reassuring hand on my arm. "Just breathe. We've got this." "Easy for you to say," I murmured, my voice raspy from weeks of barely sleeping. The events leading up to this moment, the humiliation, the betrayal, it all weighed heavily on my soul. My son, David, sat across the aisle, his face a mask of feigned concern. Beside him, Melissa, her lips pursed in a tight smile, radiated an icy composure. They looked the picture of success, the very image they'd cultivated for the world, an image built on a lie, on my suffering. "They don't know what's coming," I whispered, a flicker of steel entering my gaze. "They have no idea." Ms. Ramirez gave my arm a final squeeze. "Let's remind them." Then the judge entered, the gavel banged, and the final arguments began. David's lawyer, a slick, expensively dressed man whose name I couldn't be bothered to remember, rehashed the same tired arguments about David's generosity, his filial duty. He painted a picture of a loving son supporting his aging father, a narrative meticulously crafted by Melissa to enhance their public image. Hidden poverty meets glittering wealth in a tale of revenge. And today, the scales would finally tip. "Mr. Thompson is a fortunate man to have such a devoted son," he concluded, his voice dripping with false sincerity. He glanced at the jury, confident in his performance. My turn. I rose slowly, my joints protesting, and walked to the stand. I met the jury's eyes, one by one, holding their gaze. These were ordinary people, not swayed by fancy suits and practiced smiles. They'd see the truth in my eyes and the lines etched on my face. "My son, David," I began, my voice surprisingly strong, "claims to provide me with $8,000 a month. He boasts about it to his business partners, to the press, to anyone who will listen. He uses my supposed dependence on him to bolster his image, to paint himself as a caring, successful son." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "But the truth is, I haven't received a single penny from him in over 2 years." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. David's carefully instructed facade began to crumble. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes darting between me and the jury. Melissa's smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold fury. "I have here," I continued, holding up a thick stack of documents, bank statements, utility bills, rent receipts, proof that I have been struggling to make ends meet, while my son parades his fabricated generosity. Ms. Ramirez stepped forward, handing the evidence to the court clerk. "But that's not all," I said, my voice gaining strength with each word. "I also have this." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, worn envelope. It was a letter written years ago by my late wife, Eleanor. "This is a letter my wife wrote to David shortly after his marriage to Melissa. She expressed her concerns about Melissa's influence over him, her ambition, her lack of scruples." The courtroom was silent as Ms. Ramirez read the letter aloud. Eleanor's words, filled with love and worrying, resonated in the hushed space. She'd seen through Melissa's facade from the beginning, predicted the path David was heading down. The letter spoke of a family Christmas banquet, a seemingly joyous occasion that masked the simmering tension between Eleanor and Melissa, the first cracks in the foundation of our family. A Christmas banquet hides a bitter secret, a secret that was now laid bare for all to see. David's face was ashen. Melissa's eyes blazed with anger, but her composure remained unbroken. They knew the game was up. Then came the final blow. And finally I said, my voice ringing with a quiet triumph, "I present to the court this recording." Ms. Ramirez played a recording of a conversation between David and Melissa, a conversation I'd secretly taped during a recent visit. Their voices, cold and calculating, filled the courtroom. They discussed their plan to use me, to exploit my vulnerability for their own gain. They spoke of me with contempt, with utter disregard for my feelings or my dignity. A son's public lie shatters a father's pride, but to date, that pride was restored. The silence that followed was deafening. The jury's faces were grim. David and Melissa sat motionless, their carefully crafted world collapsing around them. The verdict came swiftly. The jury found in my favor, awarding me a substantial sum for defamation and emotional distress. But more importantly, the truth was out. David and Melissa's reputation, their carefully constructed image, was in tatters. Their deceit was exposed for the world to see. As I left the courtroom, the weight that had been pressing down on me for so long finally lifted. I wasn't a broken, humiliated old man anymore. I was Edward Thompson, a man who had faced his son's ruthless ambition and won. The victory wasn't just about the money. It was about reclaiming my dignity, about exposing the truth. And as I walked out into the sunshine, I knew Eleanor would have been proud. Justice, in its own quiet way, had been served. The inheritance I truly valued wasn't measured in dollars and cents, but in the restoration of my honor, a legacy more precious than any fortune. One family's secrets, unraveled in a dazzling display of deceit, had finally found their reckoning.